Hey everyone. Today, we're going to talk about a guy who completely flipped our understanding of human diversity on its head. His name? Franz Boas. And his work, well, it fundamentally changed a word we throw around all the time: culture. Let's get into it.
And just so you know, our deep dive today is built on the incredible research of anthropologist Louise Neilton Correa, specifically from his work Culture in 250 Concepts and Definitions. We're leaning on his scholarship to guide us through this story.
All right, let's kick things off with a huge question. For a really long time, this was just accepted as fact. Can one culture actually be better, more advanced than another? Well, back in the 19th century, the answer was a loud, clear yes.
See, the big idea back then was something called cultural evolutionism. It basically imagined every society in the world on this single giant ladder. You started at the bottom rung of savagery and climbed your way up to the top, which, surprise, surprise, was European civilization. It was a simple, neat, and totally wrong idea. And it took a real outsider to come along and suggest something completely different: cultural relativism.
So who was this outsider? Well, the man who would eventually be called the father of modern anthropology. Believe it or not, he didn't even start out as an anthropologist. Franz Boas was actually a German Jewish physicist and geographer. He was trained to study things, not people.
Let's trace his path for a second. He's born in Germany, studies the hard sciences, and then in 1883 he heads out on this expedition to Baffin Island, way up in the Canadian Arctic. His job was supposed to be cartography, just mapping the coastline. But what he discovered there changed everything, because he ended up living with the Inuit people.
And that experience, that journey, was the spark. It shifted his entire focus from mapping the physical world to trying to understand the human one. This wasn't just a career change. It was a revolution in thinking that would reshape the entire study of humanity.
And this is where the light bulb really went off for him. Boas figured out that you can't truly understand a people by reading about them in a cozy office thousands of miles away. No, you had to live with them. He saw that the Inuit, even with their completely different way of life, weren't primitive or lesser. They were incredibly smart, complex people, perfectly in tune with their world. And that flew in the face of all the theories he'd been taught.
So he takes this powerful personal insight and turns it into a full-blown scientific mission. He comes back to the academic world, but not as a geographer. He comes back as a fighter, ready to take on the so-called scientific racism that was so common in his time.
And he had a game plan. It was methodical. First, he just picked apart the flimsy arguments of the evolutionists, showing where they were wrong. Second, he introduced this powerful new idea: cultural relativism, the basic concept that any culture has to be understood on its own terms. And third, and this was absolutely crucial, he built something to last. He went to Columbia University and started the first ever anthropology PhD program in the US, basically creating an army of new thinkers to carry on the work.
Okay, so if culture isn't a ladder you climb, what is it? Boas knew he had to offer a new definition. But the man was careful. He was patient. In fact, after a whole lifetime of this work, he didn't publish his first big, detailed definition of culture until he was 72 years old.
And here it is. It's not about progress, right? It's about the whole shebang. It's the social habits of a group, how individuals react to those habits, and all the stuff, the art, the tools, the ideas that we create because of them. The key takeaway here is that culture is a whole system, working together, not just some stage you pass through. Let's break that down even simpler. Boas saw culture as having three main parts that are all tangled together. First, how we deal with nature, what we eat, where we live. Second, how we deal with each other, our families, our rules, our politics. And third, all that subjective stuff, our art, our beliefs, our sense of right and wrong. You can't really separate them. They all weave together to make a culture what it is.
But this is where Boas's thinking gets really wild. He pushed the whole idea of culture into a territory that, honestly, was light years ahead of his time. He started asking this really radical question: is this whole complex web of behavior we call culture, is it just a human thing? Are we the only ones?
And his conclusion was mind-blowing for the era. He literally wrote that there's no absolute gap between us and animals. He talked about bowerbirds that seem to appreciate art and form, monkeys that enjoy wearing ornaments, even how domesticated animals seem to know right from wrong. He was suggesting that the very seeds of culture might not belong only to us.
And you see how this all connects back to his core idea of relativism, right? If we need to try and understand a bowerbird's behavior on its own terms, then shouldn't we give other human societies that same respect? That principle is basically the foundation for how we even try to navigate our multicultural world today. It's about understanding before you judge.
So when you add it all up, what was the real impact of this physicist who became a revolutionary thinker? I mean, it was absolutely monumental.
Because of that PhD program he started, his ideas didn't just stop with him. They spread, they grew, they evolved. He taught a who's who of the next generation of thinkers. People like Margaret Mead, who changed how we think about growing up, Claude Lévi-Strauss, a giant of social theory, Gilberto Freyre, who redefined how Brazil understood itself. His legacy is literally baked into the foundations of modern social science.
And so, we're left with the same challenge Boas gave us. A challenge to this idea that we're so special and separate from everything else. If culture isn't this bright, shining line that divides humans from animals, but more of a spectrum of behavior we might share, well, what does that really say about our place in the world? It's a question that anthropologists are still wrestling with today.